Okay, well, hello everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us at Clemson's first annual Tigers for Inclusion, Diversity, and Ethics, or TIDE conference. My name is Dr. Jill Shelnut, and I am a third-year faculty member in the College of Education. I also serve as the College of Education's representative on the university's ethics committee here at Clemson. I teach undergrad and graduate students in early childhood education. And we are also joined tonight by a fellow doctoral student in the College of Education, Ms. Tamiko Smalls, and she serves as a student on the university's student ethics organization. So we are in good hands tonight, and we're absolutely thrilled that Dr. Jeremiah Holliday is presenting with us and sharing his expertise with us. And, we've got participants who are Clemson students, Clemson faculty. We have folks joining us from local school districts. And so this is a really exciting session. Dr. Holliday comes to us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so a different time zone, as we just realized, where he serves as the Chief Academic Officer for Milwaukee Public Schools. His session, which is entitled, Are You For Real? The Challenges of Ethical Leadership in K-12 Education During the Pandemic, will begin shortly. Just wanted to say real quickly that after Dr. Holliday's presentation, there will be time for a few questions before we hear from the keynote speaker beginning at 6:30, okay? I will try to monitor the chat throughout the session to be sure that everything is running smoothly. And I think if there are no questions before we get started, I'll turn it over to Dr. Holliday.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shelnut. And I'm so very excited to be a part of the TIDE conference, and certainly thank you for having me to be a part of this wonderful opportunity that I will share with you. The first thing that I'll do, I'll share my screen with you with the PowerPoint presentation that I have up. So if you can give me a thumbs up to make sure that you're able to see the presentation, I'll just put it in. Good, awesome. Thank you. So again, I'm Jeremiah Holliday. And again, I'm so excited to be a part of the TIDE conference as you focus in on Tigers for Inclusion, Diversity, and Ethics Conference. Wow, this is so huge, right? This evening, we will have an opportunity to really engage not only in a dialogue, but I'm hopeful that we can actually be a little interactive in terms of inputting information maybe into the chat room or of some sort so that you can really be able to participate freely and share in the conversation, if you will, as we really look at true challenges of ethical leadership in K-12 education during the pandemic. And so, what I would like for us to do first is really, I want to anchor our work in the place of a mindful moment activity. And let me just briefly share that with you. I realize it is 5 o'clock in the evening where you are and 4 o'clock here. And at every meeting that I have with my direct reports, we pause at the end of the day to make sure we're doing this mindful moment. And so, for those of you who are comfortable, if you will, join in with me. And by getting yourself in a comfortable position, once you're in that comfortable position, take a look at the picture that is on the screen before you. And right on the picture, there's a rainbow, there is water, there's like a waterfall, and there are other mountains, a very hilly place, pretty green grass that's there. I want you, and the sky is nice and blue, the sun is peeking through the clouds. I want you to picture yourself in that place. So, forgetting all of the things that you had to do on today, the hiccups that you had along the way, I want you to just close your eyes if you're comfortable and picture yourself there just for a moment. And what I want you to do, On the count of three, I want you to inhale. One, two, and three. Slowly exhale, releasing all of the negative energy. Inhale, all of the positive energy. Exhale, all of the negative energy. And sit for a moment in your place. And one last time, inhale, exhale. And when you're ready, bring yourself back to this place, the presentation for our Tide Conference. Thank you. And again, are you for real? The challenges of ethical leadership in K 12 education during the pandemic. Let's focus in on, I tend to like to give at least some insight in terms of where we are and where we're going with the presentation. Today, we will focus on, and I will intentionally read the next two slides intentionally. The others, I will continue on talking from those slides. But I want to specifically read this because I want you to know where we're going in the purpose of this session. We will focus on ethical leadership in K 12 education during the pandemic as framed by six moral complexities. And they are academic leadership, equity, well being, freedom of choice, disparities, and politics. Mm. And how certain policies and or procedures may seek to assist or hinder what is truly valued. So with this COVID-19 pandemic, it has created an unprecedented crisis with momentous challenges for K-12 education, as well as for institutions of higher education. Academic leaders have been charged with rethinking or restructuring what their educational system will and should look like, and as well as ensuring the instructional quality while operating with, let's say, at one point, significantly diminished resources. So out the gate, we started out with very limited resources. And so, how will we know that we are successful or we are addressing the needs moving forward? So, I have what we call a success outcome. We will know we are successful when participants are able to understand the challenges facing K 12 education and be able to approach these six moral complexities in your everyday life and or work environment to really create a more perfect union within our society. And how do we begin to do that as we begin to address the inequities and the social unrest that plagues our society as it stands? I've laid out for you the presentation outline. And under each complexity, these six moral complexities, right? There are questions that I have placed there as a means for us to ponder. So, in understanding that as leaders or as a K 12 leader, how do I really address uh, the needs of each and every child in a very unfamiliar territory, right? This is very unique. How do we ensure that we are clear on our definition of equity? What does that mean? How do we make sure that we are putting equity into practice? Are we dressing? How are we addressing the well-being of our students, our staff, and our families? And what does it mean about this freedom of choice? And what does that look like as we talk about reopening schools and reopening IHEs and other places? And then how do you really address the disparities? Because they are real, they are true. And then this other thing, wow, how do we begin to navigate the political landmines, if you will, of the politics that exist within education? And what I would share with you, as we know, the K 12 schools are in a very unique place. So unique that since the pandemic, the question that has plagued us over the past year is how will we deal with the, let's say in March of 2020, the unfinished learning? How will we not focus on what I hear people are saying, learning loss? I don't particularly care for that phrase, but I like to say, how are we going to accelerate learning? How are we going to address those essential standards? No, we're not going to teach to a test, but we're going to teach on grade level to ensure every student is ready if we're truly saying in the K-12 sector that we want students to be college, career, and community ready. So as we journey to reopening schools, it is not without its challenges. It's the challenge, the moral complexities, as we are talking this evening, that really exacerbates how we safely ensure we are operating in equity. And so I think one of the places that I will get to momentarily is how do we truly and really define equity? What does that mean? Because people tend to get two words mixed up, and that's equality and equity. And so I want to later in the presentation give some distinct differences here, if you will, because as a leader in K-12 education, one must always operate in the spirit of integrity and really be true to his or her own conscience, right? So, over the years, I would say, by far, the majority of school leaders have really worked hard to or strive to maintain the highest ethical behavior in terms of advocating for our students, teachers, as well as our parents. But since this pandemic, it has certainly compromised some of the integrity because of the barriers. Believe it or not, just opening up a meal site. Where on what side of town am I going to open up a meal site? Am I going to open up a meal site where everybody have cars they can get to it, and then someone else who lives on the north side of town will have to travel to the south side of town, or vice versa? All of those things come into play. How I would say though, despite their ethical efforts, school leadership and administration have become more of a daunting challenge for most very talented leaders, even such as myself. Because when this pandemic hit, I was taken back, and here it is in that role of chief academic officer. I had to think outside of the box. What are other states doing? What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And I could distinctly remember March 13th, 2020, sitting in the superintendent's suite, and the governor gave this big announcement that we are shutting down schools. And my goodness, my heart was pounding and pounding very fast, right? And that entire weekend, Friday night, late with trying to figure out how we're going to create what we call hard copies or packets to get into the hands of our boys and girls. And that was both in English and Spanish. And so it was very challenging because we have a district with so many different languages, and there are seven major languages that we try to make sure that we are providing the learning in the appropriate format. So again, these things really, the pandemic exacerbated, and it also, in many ways, I would say, it exposed us as K-12 educational leaders. Well, how so? Well, you found out that we were not adequately prepared, and there was and again, a lot of politics. There are a lot of unanswered questions, and you had people who were very fearful of their life in terms of getting this, this term. It could be very terminal and it had been terminal, right? Over 500,000 people deceased. And so we have to think about all of those things. And so I won't get so caught up into that piece, but I'm showing you how the ethics plays a huge part in it, because now if you're the leader of this, and I live on the south side of town, of course I want to make sure south side is taken care of. That's the side I live on, and I have 4 children. Well, we have to think about all children. Think about our students with disabilities. Think about the disparities. We already know of current disparities, but there are many others. Give me a moment now to try. I would like to um, get you to engage with me, if you will, uh, into a place of creating an answer garden. And I want to know, how will you, in one word, describe um, last year in one word? And I'm not sure, Doctor, can I possibly do that?
Thinking maybe if you put the link in the chat,
Okay.
maybe if you copy and paste the link for the answer garden in the chat, then maybe we can all get on from there.
And I'm placing it there now
Thank you.
if that would work.
Okay, thank you, Tamiko.
Oh,
Thank
no
you.
problem. All right, so I just placed it there, and I'm getting ready to post it, and everyone should be able to get to it. HTTPS answergarden.ch 1857498. Okay.
Thank you. And from there, I'm just going to give an opportunity to switch out just a moment to put it here, and it will actually populate for those who are able to. And are you still able to see the screen with the answer garden? How would you describe last year in one word?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Just going to shift. There we go. Am I getting any? I don't see any just yet populating in.
I put mine in, so
Okay.
I'm not sure.
I'm able to see it when I put mine in. I can see the responses of others.
Oh, okay.
I see it now. Thank you.
I
Are
see
you
it.
all? Okay, thank you. It was a little delayed on my end. Gotta love technology, right? Connectivity.
Of course.
I am seeing words. Thank you all so much for participating. Feel free. And if there's another word that jumps to your mind, horrific, emotional, with an exclamation mark, absolutely, challenging, unsettling, overwhelming, devastating. Yes, all of these words that you have just shared have certainly been the thoughts and the feelings of not only our yours, but our leaders as well. Could you imagine having to really go into a space and make such a tough decision around what is going to happen with the education of our boys and girls that has been entrusted into our care? And the current district that I am a part of is about 75,000 students. K through 12. So the largest school district in the state of Wisconsin. Could you also think about school districts within California, Florida, Miami-Dade, Orange County? Could you think about those large districts in terms of what are we going to do for our boys and girls who may not have access to all of these materials or may not even be able to even get the packets? So even in our best attempt, right, that was not the only thing that we had to do. And as you think about it, you sharing that one word, all of those feelings, and as a leader, you have those same feelings. And then let's cap it off with having to stand in front of a camera, having to do what we call press conferences, and knowing that the world at this point is watching you. And again, how are you going through this storm, if you will, is going to be a true testament, and I would have to say, and it has been a true testament of one's leadership ability. And so again, all of those were feelings and thoughts that many leaders across the country in the field of education, not just K 12, but also in higher ed, having to rethink some things. Let me share with you the academic leadership. When we look at the academic leadership, and as we're hitting these complexities now, really the academic leadership entails a leader being able to really make informed decisions on the next steps. There is a professor, Professor Clifford E. Tyler, shares his research on some of the ethical challenges facing K 12 leaders. He indicated in an article entitled Today's Challenges and Dilemmas and for Ethical School Leaders that leaders have been ethically challenged to make difficult decisions, really while coping with high stake pressures from political leaders and the public, along with school accountability and legislation. Some schools have already gone back, some have not. Some are faced with the fight between the union. This is nationwide, actually, where there is concerns there. Some people are saying, what about the ventilation in the buildings, right? And some of these buildings are older than all of us, all of our ages put together. And how do you really combat that? How do you really focus on those pieces? And when you look at it, even more recently, looking and understanding that in a place where there is a high code of ethics, they are found to compete with what I would say conflicting state and federal standards. And that's why I mentioned earlier in our learning criteria, are that sometimes these policies and procedures are interfering with the actual learning, or it interferes with one being able to move forward in getting the work done. And I think that's where we have to come to grips as leaders and as educators, that when we are faced with these things, how do we continue to operate in the spirit of integrity, right? How do we ensure that students have what they need to be successful, and that teachers are not going to wayward sites to get materials that we as leaders should have in place for them? And so one of the things that I would add, even like considering in addition to what I'm sharing with the academic leadership piece, we have to think about what professional learning teaching staff will need. We have to think about that. What are their learning curve? Everybody is not tech savvy. Everybody didn't use that nice smart board that we had in the classroom with the laptop. So how it will be provided to ensure the high quality, standards aligned, grade level instruction and assessment are occurring. Really thinking about what is it that our teachers need so that they can be successful at teaching, while at the same time addressing their social emotional needs as well. And so when I think about regular education, in special education, let's not forget about our English language learners. You know, how will their needs be met, right? We have our students with disabilities who say, we say we're offering virtual, right? But students with disabilities, some of them might not be able to really access their specially designed instruction virtually. And here in our state of Wisconsin, it was clearly communicated that this is what you all will do. And that is, you would bring your students with disabilities back. Yes, in the midst of a pandemic. And how do we keep that continuous learning moving? Some students have been reached, some students were not able to be reached. Why? You know, some students being that they were in a place of being displaced or homeless. And that creates other situations. And we got to think about as leaders. And what always brings me back to reality is, and I ask myself, Jeremiah, what would you want for your children? And all four of my children are school age. What would you want? And if it's not good enough for your four children, then it's not good enough for anyone else's. That's that ethical piece. That's operating with that integrity piece. Because again, you can't say it's good for others, but you would not put your children or your child in that space. So I go back to how to lead in a time that is unfamiliar to everyone. This is when you don't become an island. You work with other leaders across the state, across the country to figure this out and not to feel like you got to have the answers to something that is so unprecedented. Here is another activity, and Ms. Smalls, if you can assist me again, I would certainly appreciate it. And I may need to do it on this end though.
Not a problem.
Okay, I want to bring up this YouTube video um, so the everyone can actually see it. And how does COVID-19 create inequity in K-12 education? And I will talk from there, but I want to show the video first, and
Okay.
we can certainly ignite some reactions in the chat room, if you will. Are you able to bring that up so all of us can see it?
Well, since you are leading the share right now, if you will actually click on that video or do a right click and click on it, or go down into your notes down at the bottom.
Okay.
Yes, click on it. You should be able to click on it there.
I was earlier, but I guess it's not letting me do it in the
I
presentation.
know what you need to do. So go down to the very bottom of your screen, and you see that thing that looks like a overhead projector screen. Go to your right. I mean, keep coming over. Yes, click on that.
Okay.
And show your PowerPoint in that mode.
Okay.
And then you should be able to click on the video.
Oh, thank you.
So we have a slight delay on our end, or at least on my end, but you should be able to pull it there. If you can't, I'll go on and type it in, and but you should be able to pull it there.
Okay. For whatever reason it didn't. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Oh, there it is. No, I didn't do something right. It was on me. Thank you.
Yes.
Are you all seeing it now?
It's taking a little delay on our end.
Okay. All right.
But if you click on it, it should be able to pull it up.
Okay, so it's coming up now. Are you good?
The COVID-19 pandemic has created or kind of exacerbated inequality.
Press pause for just a moment.
Okay.
All right, so go back into your screen share. You're sharing the presentation with us. So this time, go back to your screen share and stop sharing this one and actually share the video.
Okay.
So when you pull up screen share again, it should give you the option to select the screen that the video is on.
Thank you. I missed that step. You're absolutely correct. Thank you.
Oh, no problem.
Do you see why we need persons to know what they're doing?
Absolutely do.
I appreciate it. So let me just click on the screen there and let me share.
The COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay. Are we ready?
Yes, we can see it.
The COVID-19 pandemic has created or kind of exacerbated inequality that already exists in education and really in American society, and reflects that. the first decision about whether schools should open or not. We worry that if schools don't open and kids don't come to school, then the most vulnerable children will fall behind, because we know that disadvantaged children tend to fall behind during summer vacation, for example. On the other hand, we also worry that if we open schools, our most vulnerable populations might be more affected by the increase in COVID-19 in the community. So I think however we do it, we always have to keep equity at the forefront of our minds, because otherwise it's just going to exacerbate the inequalities that already exist. So I think the question is, how is this going to affect communities? We know, for example, that Black families tend to be more likely to prefer remote learning or choose remote learning than white families. They might be more likely to be an intergenerational family with worries about transmission, and with Asian and Latino families kind of in the middle. But perhaps the class issues in terms of smaller learning spaces are more likely to have certain health conditions in the family that make it especially worrisome if someone does contract COVID-19. COVID-19 has affected Black communities much more than white communities. But if that's the case, then if they're more likely to choose remote learning, then how do we make remote learning robust and make sure that it addresses the needs of those communities just as much as the in-person learning does? And I think that's the real challenge, is maintaining our focus on equity, even when we're just trying to get by, and everybody's working incredibly hard, but we've got to have that equity focus at front and center, because we know that this is going to affect equity. So, if that means having small group sessions with the most vulnerable learners on a particular day of the week, then that needs to happen. Or thinking about what resources families need to be successful. First, do they have enough food to eat? Do they have an internet connectivity? How can we help connect them to legal services if there is an issue with legal status or housing? Okay, yes, you need to for your children, but also be thinking beyond your child in order to push to helping meet the needs of other families as well.
Okay, you can stop sharing. Okay.
Okay, awesome.
Welcome.
What are some of the reactions? Any thoughts?
Welcome, distinguished guests, faculty, and
My
graduates
apologies.
to the March 2021 University of Phoenix virtual
Give
commencement.
me just a moment.
We are honored to be here to commemorate this special moment with you and your loved ones.
Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to, even from the video, as we take a look at it, here it is, the professor here, who really shares with us some inequities that exist and some of the things that is really true from this pandemic. And that is that you have your family, your Black families, and we know that this disease actually impacted it was impacting the more of the Black and brown community. And so when you look even at the equality, let's understand, we're not talking about equal here, right? Equity is, and how we as a state define equity is, we defined it by what is needed. In other words, students have what they need when they need it at the time that they need it. And so really understanding that piece. Yes.
I was going to say, Dr. Holliday, I think my computer actually went out for just a moment when you asked if we had a comment.
Yes.
Actually, Dr. Shelnut and I were talking prior to everyone logging on, and I was telling her I subbed in a school. I've subbed in a school while we're out during the pandemic, and I was a virtual teacher at that school, and I like the fact that you brought in equality and equity, because I think about the children in that classroom, and I was working in a Title I school that's probably 95% Black students. Maybe 10%, maybe the other 5%, or at least 4% are Hispanic, and the other 1% is white. But one of the things that I found out in my classroom is is that I didn't get the training to help those students. So I was teaching myself. So I'm glad I'm kind of technology savvy. But the thing that I learned is sometimes my kids would be logging off, and we had a system set up where I had to let them in the waiting room. And, at first hand, I thought, you know what, they are checking out whenever they get ready. But I later realized that they were losing internet connectivity and they didn't have what they needed in order to stay in class. And also, there were activities that were set up for them prior to me taking over the class and we were talking about how the low rate of them turning in work. Well, it wasn't that they were not turning in their work. The problem was they were asked to do multiple steps in order to submit their work, and they
Mhm.
didn't have the ability to do it that way. And so, like when you're saying the equity piece, I just had to come up with ways that they could all turn it in and be okay. So I appreciate you bringing in the equity and the equality piece in that. They all had computers, but they didn't have the same skill sets to be able to turn the work in the same way.
Very good point. Thank you for sharing that, Ms. Falls. That is absolutely correct. And it's quite interesting because when I think about this, when this pandemic first happened, of course, again, you heard me say earlier, I have 4 children, and and interesting enough, for the holiday for Christmas, I had purchased the 2 oldest children in 2019. I had purchased them the Chromebooks. And how timely was that? But then, even when the pandemic hit, because I was working from home, my wife was working from home, we had 3 children that needed to have access to internet, and it was moving at snail speed. And so I said to my wife, get the highest speed internet that you could find. I don't care what it costs. But how many families are not they're not in that situation, if you will, to be able to do that. And it becomes really important as a leader in whatever capacity, because we all are leaders in some capacity, to ensure that whatever the needs of our students, they are met. And I applaud you for being really creative to make sure that those needs were being met for students, the students in which you were caring for. Because again, when you start looking at inequities and the disparities, when you start talking about the opportunity gap or the achievement gap, whatever word we put on it, there still is that gap. And how do we begin to, as leaders, operate within integrity? I'm going to go move to the next part. I got a couple of more slides that I certainly want to share with you. And the next piece, in terms of really addressing equity and ethics in the pandemic, and what does that really mean for us as a unit? So, and I put a list of things, but this is not all inclusive. When you begin to think about um, many students across the country lack having the resources and may not have those meals available. And sometimes being at school is the only time that they will get that nutritious meal, right? And so trying to figure out of a large district of 70 some thousand students, how many sites do we even have? Who's going to man it? So now it's another equity issue, because the people that are usually placed on the front line in the K-12 sector are those individuals who are on uh, the low end of the spectrum in terms of positions or titles, or let me say jobs. So your cooks, your custodial staff. Those are where your Black and brown individuals may be holding those positions, and many of them may have underlying conditions. So now we're putting them on the front line, where others are at home working remote, or your safety people. And then, of course, let's talk about the technology piece. You know, I have been doing Zoom and technology forever, right? But yet and still, I'm very fortunate that I have Miss Smalls on, who can coach me through some of the steps that I may have missed, right? But how many of our children at home actually have that access? And so we got to think about even the connectivity. We partnered with some of the phone companies, and we got what we call these hotspots. And even then, we said, okay, what if we put a van in the parking lot and just put the hotspot in the van? Well, we have to think about in those areas that are questionable um, in terms of crime, you're going to create another situation where somebody would possibly vandalize the vehicle. So that was so you're coming up with all of these different things to meet the needs. And someone posed a question, and some said, well, what about a family of 5? We just give them one Chromebook. And of course, I was very adamant. And this is when I operated as a leader to say, absolutely not. Every child needs his or her own Chromebook. And because could you imagine trying to wait for your sibling to get done with this Chromebook before you do your homework? And when you got the different ages, I have a first grade, I have a preschooler, a first grader, a fifth grader, and then an eighth grader. That is not going to work. And so, really keying in on those things, and how are we going to ensure that there's meaningful instruction? What is this synchronous and asynchronous learning? What does that look like? Because then, if you say that we're going to spend only 2 hours on the computer, now people want to really say students shouldn't be on the computer no more than 2 hours. I have a different perspective about that. If I give my child a computer, my children, they would stay on it all day if I would allow them to do so. We are to, so then if we think about instruction virtually, then how do we increase the rigor? How do we ensure that our students are getting what they need? And then when you start thinking about that learning acceleration, and one of the things that I really pushed within my world is we have to accelerate learning and not talk about loss of learning. I would also, the well-being of all. Every person is important. Parents, students, staff, and yes, even individuals who work at central office, who work in the larger office, or who's part of the senior cabinet. Every person is important. And we have to think about and give an account of a person's well-being around their social emotional health. And I know we say social emotional learning for students, but you got to think about social emotional health for adults. Dr. Ruth Fatton and others from Johns Hopkins University, they shared a document around the importance of well-being and how there are concerns that must be addressed. Well-being concerns that the conditions are needed for people to lead a decent life is what Dr. Fatton said. And then Dr. Fatton also talked about the physical health, that physical health is one important component of well-being, but so too are the mental health, the behavior development. If many of you, like me, you perhaps have experienced a death or many. I've experienced many deaths from my family. I'm from a very large family, so I've experienced many deaths from individuals who were from COVID. And it took a toll, and having to get your mindset in a place of hey, I gotta be well, I gotta do this. And then what does that mean for your well-being? So really and truly, all aspects of well-being of children must be considered as districts think about both when and how and to reopen schools, and what are those conversations. Some of our schools have reopened across the country where others are not. And in that case, I'm almost certain that it's those schools where we are looking at rural areas, urban and high poverty district. They are one, have been far less able to reach all the students. And now we're talking about bringing those students back. And so when you begin to think about the safety of it all, we have to give consideration to all components. And again, when you start thinking about synchronous and asynchronous learning, that if we're going to say you go and be in charge of your own learning for 6 hours and the teacher is only going to teach 2 hours, and as a K-12 leader, am I okay with that? Am I operating in equity? And am I operating in ethics? So a lot of these things are so compromised And we have to be cognizant of that. I'll hit another point I think that will really help kind of anchor this work even more so is the fact that the freedom of choice. And I really just began to put like list of questions. I just began to put questions that I have read, things that I've studied from the research. There's so much research around K-12 educational leadership and the ethics, and there's so much data that really is a part of that as well. But the part that gets me is how do we continue to anchor our work if we have individuals who are not true to the cause? So when you think about our teachers, you think about administrators and staff choice, certainly there has to be some, yes, levels of accommodations for individuals. There certainly has to be a concern. As someone say, it's not just about vaccination. And of course, it's not that we can direct a person to get vaccinated. That's a person's right at this point. And so, how do we begin to understand that and move forward in the work? The other piece that I would add as you are looking through these questions from the lens of a leader, whether you're the superintendent, the chief of operation, chief of administration, if you're the assistant superintendent or deputy superintendent, or if you're the president of the university or the dean of the college, in whatever capacity that you're operating in, what does this freedom of choice look like? And what does it mean for individuals who are not at a place where I'm even wanting to get the vaccine? And then how do I begin to really lead as a leader the work? And one thing that I've said in many presentations and talks that I've given across the country is understanding that when it comes down to educating children, students have to be first and foremost at the forefront. And we have to always give consideration to the ethical piece of it, because if we do not, then we fail to operate in the spirit of integrity. I want to add here the addressing disparities piece, because one of the things that I know for certain that is so key is two of the biggest hurdles in terms of moving America's school online certainly was the inadequate number of digital devices for students and millions of families. Certainly, as you heard me say earlier, they really lack on the need of high-speed internet access at home. And also when we start talking about even companies were not prepared for this huge pandemic and the need for these large orders. And so these gaps in basic technology access certainly in particular was a start along the socioeconomic lines of our districts in our communities. If you even look at individuals who are in the rural areas, not being able to have access to broadband and not the connectivity issues, major cause for the lack. And again, you can give me the computer so I have access to a tech device, but then am I able to manipulate it the way that I need to? And as Ms. Smalls so eloquently put it, in terms of her students, yes, they had the device, but in terms of how they were able to submit their assignments, creating multiple opportunities. This is when you're operating in equity, you're operating in ethics, because again, it should never be a one size fit all. And so when we begin to look at in districts, even with the lowest percentages of students from low income families, just 1 in 5 leaders reported in late March last year that a lack of basic technology is a major problem, huge problem, compared with nearly 2/3 of leaders in districts where the highest percentage of students are from low income families. And so again, this begins to really hurt us and cause us to really miss out on some of the things or the needs, or to ensure students have what they need. Now, let me be clear. Of course, this is not the only piece. When you talk about addressing disparities, there is bukus of research that's out there, and I wish I really had the opportunity or the time to really go into it. But again, of course, there are others. You got the disparities in the effect of the virus itself. That's one issue. The actually healthcare. So the access to healthcare is another issue. When you start looking at in school versus in person, the quality of virtual learning. There's a study out there which somebody completed around virtual learning and the rigor in terms of what teachers are saying and around what students are even receiving. Are they getting that quality? And the next piece that I'll share with you, which really would be the last component of this, the last of the six, is the politics and education of it all, right? We have to understand that there's politics in everything, politics in education. You have the union, even on a national scale, who are saying different things that, oh, it's not about the shot, it's about going in, making sure that the building is properly ventilated. Well, of course, how many districts have the funds to tear down old buildings and build new ones? And so you got to think about that. Your school board, what is the school board saying? They are here in Wisconsin, school boards are elected officials, of course, and I'm sure in other parts of the country as well, where you are, they're elected officials. So they have to listen to their constituents, and many of them are really focused in on listening to the constituents, maybe not listening to the science, right? What about the community partners? Their business are impacted. Some of them went under. What about our city and local government? What about the mayor and the health department? What does that mean? What about the State Department, Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, or the Department of Education where you are? What are all these pieces meaning? What about the state and federal laws? So there exist policy, laws, and procedures that either assist or either hinder the delivery of ethical and equitable instruction to all students. And then we must examine the role that the unions play in administrative decisions. Unions work in the best interest of adults, but are the decisions being made always in the best interest of children? Does the union and the school board work as partners with the school administration, or is it an imbalance of power? And just think about this. It was said by an individual that, and they were in position of authority, that I have a family to feed. Well, you're the person who makes the final decision. So again, that's where those ethics comes in at, and you have to always operate within that spirit or realm of equity and ethics. How do laws such as ESSA impact school districts' ability to make decisions about safe reopenings? How does state and federal funding play a role in decisions leaders have to make on behalf of students they serve? Millions and millions of dollars are being poured into communities, into school districts, into colleges and universities. What are we doing to ensure we are accelerating learning and that no one is lost at the end? And I would say to you, what should leaders do now? As we go back to our original charge, are you for real? The challenges of ethical leadership in education, in K-12 education during the pandemic? I believe, and I stand strong and very hard on this, that leaders lead. They lead and must lead with integrity. They lead through the lens of equity. They not only lead through the lens of equity, but there is a level of conviction that one must have. They lead with students in mind. And then you lead with a passion. And more than ever before, K-12 leaders, we must be courageous as we rethink public education. Because what we want to say in partnership with our institution of higher eds is that these K-12 students that have been received from across the world to Clemson are ready for college. So ethics in leadership is crucial and must be taken very seriously if we're going to address the opportunity or achievement gaps in our educational system. I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I will certainly welcome any questions that anybody may have at this time if we have time.
Yes, we definitely have time. So please, if any of our participants have questions, you can use the chat feature, or you're welcome to unmute if it allows you to unmute. Now that I say that out loud, I am not sure how it's set up, but if it does allow you to unmute, please do so. If not, again, you're welcome to throw your question in the chat and we will be able to respond, have Dr. Holliday or whoever the appropriate person is to respond.
I want to say thank you so much for the presentation and the opportunity to hear a leader's take on the pandemic and the processes of how leaders and educators can show ethical behaviors with regards to students during these COVID times. So thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
I would definitely echo that, what Tamiko just said. I think it's really important from the perspective of we have some Clemson students who are on, we have some Clemson faculty, and so it's important that we all understand that these, the same questions and concerns that we have from each of our own perspectives, trying to get in classrooms or trying to, conduct these field placements or just, in your case, run the entire district and all these different levels of, educational connections that we have. We all share similar concerns, troubles. I think going back to your, the one word activity, the challenges, and I think it's important to hear each other's perspectives. So I appreciate hearing it as well from a leader's perspective.
Thank you.
I have a question about how do you, as leaders in P12, how are teachers held accountable for making sure that they enact ethical practices with regards to the pandemic?
That's a very good question. And I can say that in many instances, here is what I know, and that is the K-12 education as a whole. Many of the states, some did not, but some states did. They put on hold the evaluation of teachers, of educators. So teachers are not being evaluated formally in many of our schools or school districts across the country. Now, teachers, again, are being held accountable through their school leader. The school leader has a responsibility for being in those classrooms, visiting the classroom, and providing ongoing feedback and support to teachers. Now, and I said at the beginning point in my conversation within my school district, and that was, we may not be doing a formal evaluation, but as we are visiting classrooms virtually, we are always observing and you're always giving feedback. You're celebrating what is going well, but you also are giving those what we call glows and grows. There's some areas for growth. And so through that, teachers are being held accountable through the lens of their administrators. And that can look vastly different though, as you are going throughout various districts across the state, across the country. And someone asked a question as well. Ms. Small, did I answer your question? Did that help?
Yeah, thank you so much.
There is one question I noticed in the chat. How is attendance being validated? And again, it certainly will look different across the districts, across the various states. But what I do know is happening in many of the states and in many of the districts as well, that if a student is signed on or signed in, that student is counted present. If the student, let's say, did not sign in at, let's say, 9 o'clock, but the student completed the assignment or the assignments before the end of that day, then that assignment submission counts as attendance. So you will see that the state departments of ed or public instructions have given a very broad latitude to districts, and they're able to make those adjustments. So that's what I've seen thus far around how attendance is really being counted and validated. And it gets really mucky at the high school because you're dealing now with block scheduling in periods and so forth. But again, if they finish that assignment for that class period, then they are counted as present.
And Summer, if you're referring to this particular session, if I'm not mistaken, Zoom has a feature that actually captures attendance.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Holliday, I had a quick question as well. And I think thanks to the help of Ms. Smalls, I think I enabled everyone to be able to unmute and speak if they would like to. But Dr. Holliday, I was wondering, in your particular where you are in Wisconsin, are you all offering teachers or school staff any additional training, social emotional training, or anything that's sort of come about or that you've realized has really, become necessary as a result of the pandemic?
Yes, Dr. Shona, that's a very good question. I alluded to just a little bit. I think absolutely we have learned that we actually, starting out the gate, created opportunities where we gave teachers 10 hours paid time to really indulge into professional learning. And that professional learning for that particular piece was just for around technology because of the learning curve. And then we allowed for that opportunity to happen around that social emotional piece. Because again, it's crucial. And even now it's ongoing. So Wednesdays is kind of like the big day around here where people are saying, if you're doing the hybrid model, Monday, Tuesday is a group, Thursday, Friday is a group, Wednesday is that cleaning day / professional learning day. Teachers can actually take advantage of that as well. And we actually have a lot of support that is in place and resources that not only that they can use, but for the use of the students as well. Because again, I always draw up because sometimes we make issues that are not student issues when they're actually our issues and or fears. And so definitely ongoing professional development opportunities are provided for staff so that their needs are being met.
Excellent. I'm so glad to hear that. It looks like we have another question in the chat, assuming it's for you with the expertise. So which level of students, elementary, middle, or high school, have been affected the most, in your opinion, by this pandemic? That's a great question.
That is a very good question. And it is so powerful. I'm going to go at it this way. I have to be honest. I have partiality when it comes down to elementary, middle, and high school. And here is why. When I look at elementary, I'm thinking about a kindergarten. How do you teach a kindergarten online? What does that look like? And for a mother and or a father, or however the person may identify, what does that look like for them in terms of supporting that when you're trying to teach those vowel sounds and you're trying to teach phonics? And as a kindergarten, this is your first year as a kindergarten. This is your first K-12 experience. Oh my gosh. And I know as a parent, kindergartners are, they gotta touch, they gotta be in that space. So they need that social interaction piece. And so that my biggest struggle, what I say is yes, at the elementary level, because now I'm concerned about those foundational skills, but all is not lost. The other part that your question is such a good question. I can lay a claim to all of them. And I'm going to go, let's say my high school students who are earning credits. We had to change board policy. We had to change board policy to say, you know what? We're going to pass fail. We're not going to have ABC, so we had to make that change. But I worry about how does colleges now look at those grades and what does that mean? And thankfully that there's great partnerships that I've seen, not only in Wisconsin, but across the country, IHEs working with K-12 school system. And so I'm always concerned about those credits. And of course now ACT, what does that mean when we have to bring them back in person to do it, and figuring those pieces out. The middle school students, the last thing that we want for our middle school student is not to have a structured day. Middle school, we all been middle schoolers before. You're trying to figure yourself out and all that stuff. So that gets to be a little hectic. But again, certainly all were impacted, but I get really concerned when you start looking at those foundational grades, because your foundation is what you build upon, if that makes sense to you.
Thank you so much for responding to that one. Looks like we don't have any other questions in the chat, but we do still have just a couple minutes left. If anyone does want to ask a final question or two before we sort of depart. And if there aren't any other questions, I do have one more thing to share with you quickly to make sure that everyone has the information as in terms of the post-session information. So let me give it just a minute here and make sure that we don't have someone typing in the chat, or if any of our attendees would like to unmute and ask a question of Dr. Holliday. Okay, that's not a great example of using wait time, right? I didn't give my full couple minutes there that I could have given a little bit more wait time, but I do feel like as I'm sharing this last bit of information, if someone thinks of a final question, please do not hesitate to put it in the chat or ask it real quickly. While you might be thinking of something to wrap up with, let me share this with you real quickly. And this is just a slide to remind you about the keynote session that is upcoming. Beginning at 6:30 tonight, we have the keynote speaker from George Washington University, the College of Law. The Dean, Dr. Dana Bowen Matthew, will be speaking with us. You can find the link to her session. You can see it down below here, but there's also a link if you go back to the clemson.edu/ethics/programs page. You can definitely find the link to her keynote session, the Zoom link, that is. And if you are a Clemson student, don't forget about the contest. You can submit a photo of you participating in this conference to be entered to win a Wendy's gift card. So that's sort of fun. You can submit via social media by tagging the Rutland Institute for Ethics, or you can direct message them, or you can email to ethics@clemson.edu. So those are some announcements I wanted to make there. I wanted to be sure to thank everyone for attending this wonderful session. Also, there should be, as soon as we complete this session, there should be a pop-up, a magical survey that appears for you to give feedback. It's very brief. The URL for the feedback form should pop right up for you. It should take no more than just a minute or two, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback on the conference. This is the first TIDE conference, hopefully of many, and we just would like to get some feedback. And you can see there the Rutland Institute for Ethics is on social media in lots of forms. So if you're a Facebook or a Twitter or an Instagram person, you can see how to connect with the Rutland Institute on those different social media platforms. All right, so with that, do we have any final questions? Did anyone think of anything that they would like to be sure to get clarified before we wrap up? Okay, well, I think we are just nearly at time. We'll give everybody a few minutes before we log back on for the keynote speaker that we look forward to hearing from. But Dr. Holliday, again, thank you so very much for your time, for your expertise, for your experiences. You just shared with us some really critical information that I think we all greatly enjoyed hearing as educators.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you having me as part of the TIDE conference.
It was our pleasure. And thank you all for joining us. That will conclude the session. Ms. Smalls, do you have one more thing?
I didn't. I was just saying thank you. And I enjoyed being here with each of you.
Yes, I enjoyed it as well. I appreciate our attendees. And again, Dr. Holliday, thank you very much for your time.
Welcome.
All right.